Hello, dear friends. We are sincerely happy to greet you again. Today we will talk to the esteemed Igor Mikhailovich Danilov.
Hello.
Igor Mikhailovich, once again, thank you very much for the previous conversation, because it has really shed light on numerous substitutions that await a person on the spiritual path. And it has also made it possible to pull weeds out of consciousness and throw off the masks of pseudo spirituality.
Well, if we go back to the previous conversation and look into the root and the very essence of it, we have basically touched upon not only the aspects of spiritual development of a human, but we discussed the case when a person already approaches the gate, how he perceives and how he opens up. But at the first steps, it's a little bit different, in fact, even if we take primary consciousness and personality. After all, as soon as a person embarks on the spiritual path, he can observe only from the position of primary consciousness. And here, there is an extremely important point that the person should actually, let's say, resist his consciousness, in particular, secondary consciousness, because it is secondary consciousness that exaggerates the situations of our everyday life the most. It aggravates and turns everything either into some too bright and unnatural colors, and then it plasters everything over, all the colors of our life, with mud, so to say. Or it drives us into this gray swamp where we don't live but exist. There is constant monotony and routine, and consciousness immediately nags us and says that we should diversify it all somehow, move away from stereotypical patterns, and then it drives us even more into the same patterns, creating discomfort, up to evoking depression in people. These are exactly, let's say, the tricks of secondary consciousness. However, when a person embarks on the spiritual path and begins to observe his consciousness, what should he do? He should learn not to accept bad thoughts. And there's a little snag here. When a person has already developed spiritually, he perceives everything realistically. It's just like we said, even a rose smells like a corpse. Why? Because it is already inevitably dead, even if it still has a root. And all these delights from smells, from beauty, well, let's say they become unserious, to put it carefully. Why? Because you see the world as a whole. You see the essence. Even when talking to people, you have to play sometimes because you know that a person thinks bad things about you, so to say, or conceals certain thoughts that are not quite decent, but you have to hide your emotions. Although, when a person has developed enough on the spiritual path, even his emotions are completely different and controllable. That's the point. Whereas when a person is just a beginner, at this stage, in order to overcome secondary consciousness, if it is quite developed, and let's say, steals colors from his life, then a person, on the contrary, should bring back those colors. That is, a person, on the contrary, should think about what? He should teach his consciousness to think correctly, and he himself should learn to perceive correctly. That's where he does need primary consciousness. And as a rule, he at first, it is different for everyone, of course, but for quite a long time, many people actually merge with primary consciousness, and control of secondary consciousness, control of thoughts, and negativity takes place. What does a person learn to do? Here it's important, friends. Firstly, not to let bad thoughts in, even if the situation is not good. Yes, it's not good. Yes, there are problems, but still, you shouldn't allow secondary consciousness to load you up like a barge with various bad thoughts or mental forms. Why? Because as soon as a person gains at least some freedom from secondary consciousness, I'm not even talking about the primary one. For now, just let it be the secondary one. Life becomes more beautiful. At this stage, a person learns precisely to admire these colors, to see their beauty, to notice little things in life which actually make life more beautiful, lighter and brighter. Here, a person can already admire the blue sky and things like that. Yet, what is the difference? When a person is already free enough as personality, let's say, he is not just standing firmly on the spiritual path, but has already achieved something. This is already perception through feelings. Then looking at the blue sky, he already understands perfectly well that those are just molecules. Yes, when a certain amount of light comes from the sun.
A play of shadows, yes?
Right, he sees the blue color. I mean, he no longer enjoys it as much as when he was taking his first steps. That's not a paradox. That's how it really is. Or let's say there's another paradox, right? After all, secondary consciousness doesn't perceive our body at all. It doesn't feel it. It feels neither pain nor anything else. Here it is exactly personality who initially experiences that very pain on the spiritual path. It doesn't feel it, but it experiences it. It is actually primary consciousness that feels pain. But our personality experiences it. Yet what's the difference? The difference is huge, friends. Our body is, let's say, a bio-machine, if we put it simply, okay? Thus, our primary consciousness is directly connected, and it actually transmits all the information to us as personality, including information about our body. And already, as personality, we perceive, we experience. I mean, as personality, we do not feel pain directly, but when we are paired with primary consciousness, we feel everything. That is, in fact, we are the primary consciousness. Of course, later on, a person already has to get to a more serious level and already control primary consciousness too. Although, there are aspects which we should discuss as well. If primary consciousness is strongly developed and hypertrophied, a person has to establish sort of a conglomerate, not with primary consciousness against secondary consciousness, but already with the secondary one against the primary one. Yet the reasoning is slightly different in this case, but this is also an interesting point, and I think we should examine it. If a person has a hypertrophied primary consciousness, he grows up. Many people encountered this in their lives, and many experienced it in themselves. He is so egocentric that everything is his, everything is for him, just like a little child.
He is often infantile, resentful, and capricious.
Yes, a great deal. Certainly, a person has difficulties with learning. It's uninteresting to him. He is interested in spending money, not in earning it. Such people are fixated on themselves. On taking. He is firmly convinced that everyone owes him. The entire world owes him. He doesn't even understand that someone has to work or something else. Such situations do happen in life, friends. Then I would say it is much harder for that person than for an average person. Why? Because he has a developed primary consciousness. Thus, as personality, he already has to establish this kind of conglomerate with secondary consciousness in order, let's say, to push primary consciousness away from himself as personality. Here, the observation should already be over emotions, over simple thoughts, and his beliefs. Where do they originate from? Why are they so emotionally strong? What makes him think that the world revolves around him? What is his advantage or difference from other people? This is exactly, let's say, the observation of those inner values of a person, his beliefs, and so forth. And when he as personality already begins to observe primary consciousness from the position of more expanded perception, meaning from the position of secondary consciousness, he already begins to catch himself on egoism and, let's say, on all manifestations of primary consciousness. That's when another stage of development begins. But it is interesting that if a person establishes this coalition with secondary consciousness,
the secondary one,
then primary consciousness is no longer that active, and it doesn't rule over the person. The first thing that happens is that less vril comes to it. In other words, it's already infringed, and it is forced to surrender its positions, to give up its egocentric mindsets. That is, it all no longer works. Let's say, what primary consciousness has been manipulating a human as personality with, since childhood, since his very birth, just ceases to work. And a person already has broader views. He already looks at other people with more freedom. It no longer torments him with health that much. You know, there are people who are always sick. Physicians no longer find anything. They have already cured everything they could. Even his neighbors, not to mention all his family, but the person is still sick. Why? Because that's the position of a victim. It's the position of sickliness. It's again an imposition on all and everyone. How sick I am. This is manipulation. Again, as a means of getting extra virile, as a choice of the best position, various things happen. Consciousness plays cruel tricks on people. Therefore, we should approach this correctly as well. So as soon as a person, let's say, has managed to curb either the primary or the secondary consciousness, whichever predominated in him, at this point it's already time for the person himself to switch to the position of an observer from personality. And that's when a serious detachment takes place. Let's suppose if a person was in a coalition with primary consciousness against the secondary one, here, he already feels the body less. He no longer cares about
those worries.
Well, not in the literal sense, friends, but actually those trifles when you cough in a wrong way or when something tingles somewhere. Well, if it tingles, that's okay, unless a serious clatter arises, Until a serious clatter arises, nobody makes a move. Here, there are nuances as well, because the body also needs to be taken care of, after all. It is what we exist in. If we use our body even as a carrier, then, pardon me, we are in a very serious liaison with it. Through our body, we perceive the entire world around us in three-dimensionality. This is extremely important, and the body should also be taken care of and monitored. Although, for a human as personality, it becomes not quite interesting anymore. And again, that very vril already becomes controllable. The power over personality already starts decreasing, and that's where spiritual development really begins. Only then a person already gains an opportunity, let's say, not to stop spiritual practices. Only then he understands the entire hierarchy of this world, while the hierarchy of this world is complicated. And here's a paradox. A human as personality understands that there can be no hierarchy, but as consciousness, he incessantly fights for hierarchy. Moreover, it is primary consciousness that fights for hierarchy the most. Secondary consciousness is a manipulator. It doesn't strive for any kind of dominance or anything else, let's say, in a hierarchical plane, to rise above everyone. Why? Because secondary consciousness is much stronger than the primary one. I mean, when it initially develops, it often becomes much stronger, more powerful, and more intellectually developed, so to say. And it has, again, secondary consciousness is a direct and immediate representative of the universal mind, or shaitan. Let's call it this way. Whatever is convenient, friends, for understanding, it's a part of that world. Whereas primary consciousness is more attached to the body. It is more attached to the neural group. And it is both here and there. It is sort of a traitor. Let's say, it's unclear how to distinctly label it. What it is more related to, personality, the body, or, say, the universal mind. And here it is extremely difficult to label it, depending on how it evolved and under what conditions it has been.
There is also another question, Igor Mikhailovich. We would like to consider one point from the perspective of how primary and secondary consciousness work. A person wrote to us the following comment. I watch videos with Igor Mikhailovich, plus I combine some Oriental practices, and this works so well. Tell us, please, who in us constantly complicates the truth?
Secondary consciousness. The primary one is unable to do that. Well, primary consciousness has its own manipulative tools, so to say, by means of which it tries to distract, to deceive, and to involve us as personality, so that we give it more vril. Whereas, when it comes to spiritual development, it is secondary consciousness that is more concerned with that. Although sometimes it's the opposite.
It wants to complicate the simple truth.
Of course, it wants to. Again, neither primary nor secondary consciousness is able to perceive the spiritual world at all. When it comes close to it at least a little bit, this is, I would say like heat for it. It's the same as if we would take a person and bring him close to a red-hot blast furnace. He doesn't really want to go there. It's unpleasant, scary, and painful, and it resembles hell. It's the same for consciousness, but consciousness is unable to explain all the processes taking place there. Therefore, it fences itself off in every possible way and does everything to preserve its domination and its power, to survive, to put it simply. And that's where primary consciousness is always on the side of secondary consciousness. In other words, two players play against a human, always. Moreover, they can multiply, and there can be dozens of them in one's mind. This is true. That's in addition to some active subpersonalities or other third forces. Even those can make up a whole theatrical troupe, so to say. You see, and they can argue instead of you and defend you. That's normal. Why? Because as soon as a person begins to mature spiritually, it's a cue. Even when he is just about to start, consciousness already gets a cue that, sorry, this person might not become a subpersonality.
It's a threat to the
a threat
system.
to future existence. Meanwhile, what is subpersonality? We discussed this a lot. Let's just say, we'll repeat, subpersonality is a long and happy life for consciousness and suffering for personality. There is already a clear identification of a person in the state of subpersonality. He understands perfectly well who he is and what he is, and he understands very well that those two components of him, so to say, which used to be a single whole in the past, primary and secondary consciousness, are no longer him. He hears them as outsiders, just as interlocutors who eat him up, make his existence even worse and constantly create problems, rubbing his nose in his past mistakes, and accusing him of the fact that, because of him, they suffer along with him. This is beneficial to them.
They always
again,
blame a person very much.
of course. But isn't this true? So how?
There is such bullying here too.
Look, absolutely. As soon as the person embarks on the spiritual path, let's suppose he is given a practice. Let's not go too far and take the lotus practice. And what does consciousness
Too
say?
simple.
Is that all? Lotus, and that's it.
I tried it. It seems to be okay, it works. So I need something more.
Of course not. How is it? How? You have to crawl on your knees to Mount Kailash, preferably from somewhere. I don't know, from another country or another continent.
Yes, exactly.
So when you arrive, they're crawling. Look at how hard you have worked. You are worthy. You've been elevated. And at this point, there begins what? There already begins the work of primary consciousness too. The two consciousnesses work as a pair. This is very easy to trace. Primary consciousness always picks up ideas of secondary consciousness, while the secondary one creates a lot of problems. If you strive spiritually, it means you should go, for instance, you are Christian.
Attributes of spirituality.
Yes, exactly. As a Christian, you should go to holy places.
Yes, sure.
Absolutely must go. You should definitely visit the tomb of Jesus Christ.
Yes, the Holy Sepulchre, sure, with all the attributes.
Of course, you should visit a bunch of churches and monasteries there, talk to holy fathers, and find yourself a confessor, because without him, you won't be able to do anything. Yet, if you think about it, why do you need a confessor? You have two interlocutors. So, do you need two more of his, who would additionally load you up?
Several legions of interlocutors.
Certainly, but as a rule, this is necessary, and our consciousness insists on it. And as soon as we find such a confessor and travel around all the holy places, what begins? You start maturing spiritually, right? And primary consciousness begins to elevate you up to the state of spiritual Nazism, when you are already spiritual, when you already can do something and know something. Others are smaller and inferior than you. It is always like that. While in this case, you just take some practice and that's it. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to do anything. You constantly stay in this love. You try to intensify it, and that's all. Well, this is somehow so illogical. It is all so simple. The spiritual path has to be hard, and so on. But consciousness conceals the fact that the entire point and the whole, let's say, responsibility and difficulty of the spiritual path is actually the inner fight.
Oh, yes.
Against those travelers, against those. I wanted to put it sort of in a civilized way.
Companions.
Concisely, yes, companions, so to say. Against these companions.
False friends.
Of course. Well, as a matter of fact, they are enemies, although they are supposed to serve you. They are supposed to be your helpers. That's the way it should be. And eventually, it will be that way if you develop spiritually. You should keep track of them. You should properly train them and so forth. But again, they aspire to become stronger. I mean, they are interested in vril. They are interested in having not only power over you as personality, but dominance over others. That's why they behave like that and do such things.
I also recall how you once said that for this world, the material world, dynamics, vibrations, and movements are very important.
Of course.
And we understand, indeed, how can consciousness determine whether a person is carrying out inner spiritual
no
work
way.
in himself or not?
In no way.
If we take two people, one of them works behind a machine tool, for example.
Yes.
He works. So will consciousness really tell you that this particular person is now...
In a spiritual practice.
Yes, in a spiritual practice.
I'll say even more. A person who is actually standing right now behind a machine tool, cutting some piece out of metal or something else, and at that time, he's in contact with the spiritual world. Well, from a side, consciousness will not identify it in any way.
No, it needs a yoga mat.
Of course.
Lit incenses.
Definitely.
And necessarily a lotus pose.
Surroundings.
Yes.
Moreover, this should be somewhere on a hill so that a person would sit nicely.
With a beautiful view.
Or even better, hang in the air, right?
Yes, exactly. Possibly standing on his head.
Or standing on his head. Yes, these are obligatory attributes if we take the East. Or he should be, I don't know, so prayerful. He should kiss the hands of all priests that exist in the world and be blessed by each of them. Right? As well as take communion with everyone and from everyone. Then God's grace will come to him. While he is far from grace after all. Why? Because he is only preoccupied with, existing. Like any part of this world. Pardon me. Like any fragment we take, any particle, any charge, in constant vibrations, movements, and striving, no one knows where. Isn't that true? Where is spirituality? And what's the point? The world is divided. There is the spiritual world, it is static, calm, eternally alive. That creates these incomprehensible worlds which are striving somewhere all the time, which cannot stop even for a moment. All of us, taken together, from a material perspective, don't have such power. I'm taking not only us, humans, but in general. After all, I understand if our friends are not as selfish as others try to make us to be, they understand perfectly well that even in our galaxy there are billions of planets like our Earth. And naturally, life exists on them as well. There are so many of these planets in our universe, in so many different races, species, lives, and so on. So if we gather all together, collect all the vril that exists here, that's the most powerful, the most valuable kind of energy currency of the world, and put it all into one point in order to stop the motion of even one. I don't know, an atom is probably too much. Probably even one electron. We won't be able to do that. This is the point. I mean, all our efforts will be empty and vain. This world is so, let's say, accelerated. It has to be that way. Why? Because it is the direct opposite of the spiritual world. But it is precisely in this world that angels originate. And this is absolutely right. Well, I think one day we will talk about this too. Maybe the time will come in more detail.
You know, Igor Mikhailovich, thanks to the videos, and in particular to the previous video when you voiced the information that this world, the material world, is created not from God's love, but from a lower fraction, from vril. And this very understanding that if we look from this perspective, consciousness can in no way describe the spiritual world, because it actually operates and uses only the processed version of the lower fraction of Allat, in fact.
Surely, of course. And based on that, it is clear why consciousness will never say, in what state and who is standing in front of you. I mean, in a person standing behind a machine tool, this person can actually be already near God's gate, who already directly communicates with the spiritual world, let's say. But this doesn't prevent him either from working or from anything else. You see how simple everything is.
One should develop the spiritual component, develop personality.
But consciousness manipulates, of course. However, you have to admit that it is interesting for our
It
consciousness.
needs action and motion to understand this process.
It needs palaces, it needs a mass, a procession of some people, it needs bustle, some attributes, some outward...
Or victimhood.
Of course.
Yes, of course.
And it needs victimhood, right?
It's like a child whom everyone owes something, whom everyone hurts. And by the way, precisely in this, a lot of people consider that they can feel somewhat holy. Everyone is an offender while you are a saint. You've done nothing wrong.
Of course.
So one has to somehow carefully observe on the spiritual path this very position of a victim in oneself.
This
yes?
is primary
It is
consciousness.
such a sign of the work of the primary one.
Again, look at the initial stage. If a person, let's say, with a developed primary consciousness, with such a dominant one, starts to work on himself, say he aspires to spirituality, he has felt something somewhere. It is clear he hasn't yet created even a coalition with secondary consciousness, but he makes first attempts. Then what will happen in this case? Exactly what we are talking about, substitutions and literal interpretation of the truth. Say, in the opposite direction. In this case, a person will feel offended in order to attract attention and receive more vril. Or, on the contrary, he will exalt himself and become more spiritual and superior than everyone else. Isn't that true?
Yes, exactly.
Again, if we look, whether it is one extreme or another, behind all this, there is a banal manipulation and a desire of vril. Nothing else. And why is it the primary consciousness? It seems that it is advantageous for it that a person develops and grows.
Right.
Then it will get more power. There is a paradox here too. Spiritually, a person receives more power, and when he is in practice, or rather not so much in practice, but after practice, consciousness still gets those crumbs. But you know, I'll put it this way. They are like bread that you've just taken from the oven. You hold it in your hands, it burns, and you understand that if you bite it now, you'll get burnt. But at the same time, it is bread. It's in larger quantities than usual, but it's not tasty to eat. It is scary and unpleasant, as well as fraught with consequences. This is how our practices are perceived by our own consciousnesses, both primary and secondary ones. Therefore, it is actually better to cool down a little bit after the practice, and not to let consciousness in. Otherwise, on the one hand, when we, let's say, perform practices 5 times a day, at the minimum,
Yes.
if we cannot maintain a contact during the day, or even if we can maintain it, we have time, we can allocate half an hour 5 times a day to strengthen these states. We have such an opportunity. Then right after the practice, it is better not to accelerate consciousness. It will be better that way.
To hold on to the feeling, to that contact for a little longer.
At least, yes, you should keep consciousness away for 10 to 15 seconds to let the bread cool down. Then it will be easier for consciousness too. Otherwise, later on, it begins to be too active and to fight against us. That is, to create all conditions and throw in a lot of thoughts in order to delay practice a little bit, to perform it less frequently, a little bit shorter, that kind of thing. It seeks benefit for itself, or on the contrary, it creates problems that we cannot even perform the practice because we are in a hurry and we need something.
It simulates events in the external, yes.
Surely.
So that you would definitely have...
It defends itself. This is natural. It's an instinct. It's a reflex. Therefore, you shouldn't take offense at it. It's better to use it properly. Well, these are subtleties which, as a matter of fact, people themselves understand when they already reach this stage. Whereas at initial stages, most people perform practice usually with the help of either primary or secondary consciousness, or even with all of them together. That is, the 3 of them sit and try to stir the lotus up. Well, that's ridiculous, but it's normal.
Yes, sure.
Everyone goes through this. How can it be otherwise? And this should be...
They stop rampant secondary consciousness together with
Of course.
the guarding primary
Let's take
one.
any religion. Don't they read prayers under the dictation of consciousness? Exactly the same thing happens. One tells you how to read it properly. The other one tells you what you should feel while doing it. These advisors are kind of parasitic. At the same time, they distract and push you. Ask for something else, right? So it's normal. That's consciousness.
But everything has its time, right?
100%.
In other words, one should certainly develop his personality spiritually and gradually, meaning it all comes to order at some point.
The main thing, friends, the main thing on the spiritual path, regardless of religion, the most important thing is your goal. If your goal is indeed to reach the spiritual world, then you can come there through any religion, but only after curbing those demons. You cannot enter with them. And in this case, it is really easier to shove a camel through a needle's eye than to enter heaven, being in such a group.
And as we know, it is even dangerous to embark on the spiritual path having other goals.
You should not embark on the spiritual path at all if you have other goals. When trying to achieve something in this world, whatever goal you set, whatever goal you want to achieve, friends, I don't know, wealth, health,
Significance.
power, significance, it doesn't matter. By no means should any material values stand in your way when you embark on the spiritual path. Otherwise, you will definitely lose. You will become subpersonality 100%. Plus, let's say you will give a big hard stick to your consciousness with which it will beat you for the whole eternity because you acted this way. It will blame you afterwards because you as personality finance it. And the one who orders is the one who is responsible. The one who finances is the main, shall we say, party responsible for what was done, while consciousness only performed what you financed, although it itself prompts, pushes, argues, and convinces. Such is its function. Nevertheless, I will say, and this is what I like the most, it is when a person embarks on the spiritual path and really starts working on himself, really observes the work of consciousness, tries to fight, still being in a coalition with primary or secondary consciousness. That's the most interesting and fun time. It is fun. From both sides, from the side of consciousness and from the side of personality.
When you are at a loss who you are.
100%.
Right.
When you cannot identify yourself either as consciousness or as personality, you already feel something and understand something. You understand that you do not order.
While consciousness sets you up and lies somewhere.
Yes, you do not order this thought, but it comes to you. And here in some mysterious way, this hormonal cocktail starts pouring in you. You are overwhelmed with emotions, no matter good or bad ones, but they overwhelm you.
It's a fussy time.
While you did not order this, it's a good time.
Yes, exactly.
An interesting time. Later on, there is already experience, practice, ordering. Everything becomes serious. It starts in a mature way, whereas childhood, I mean the spiritual childhood, when you begin to develop, that's the most fun time. When you teach your consciousness, let's say, don't bring me what is bad, bring me what is good. Let a flower be bright, let a bee buzz properly. Right? When you refuse what is bad, it's interesting.
That's great.
It's a good time. It's just a pity when people live through their lives and don't see all this beauty, all the beauty of spiritual growth, all the beauty of our life, so to say. Because even here, in this world which is full of filth, hatred, and everything bad, indeed, everything that can be bad, everything is collected in this material world. Lies, betrayal, just everything. I'll put it this way. Even our obedience, our consent, when we are forced and coerced into agreeing with what is not true, with that which should not be the way it is. But we are forced to do this. And then we try to use our consciousness to justify our actions, why we acted that way. Whereas inside, we understand that this is filth, that this is wrong, and who we are in fact. Of course, it's all hard, it's all wrong. But even this is the beginning of life. And this also has its advantages. Generally speaking, life is a very interesting and mysterious thing. Why is it mysterious? Because there are too many, shall we say, explanations and interpretations, but even much more of incomprehension. So when the first steps in exploring this life begin, the first experience, that's really wonderful. And one should not be discouraged when something doesn't work right away. Because we, as personalities, strive for home. We strive to develop, and we know perfectly well what we need and where we need to go. It is only consciousness that incites us that this is wrong and that is wrong. Either the lotus is simple or, the man who stands at the machine tool is absolutely not spiritual because he's not sitting in lotus somewhere on a hill, and so on. All these are games. But to go through these games, the games of consciousness, the games of this material world, let's say, and to come out victorious is worthy of a human. While it all starts simply with love, true love indeed. So friends, let us just love each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, friends. Peace be with you.